The shadow knows.
This is to certify that I have made careful examination of the manuscript known as The Living Shadow, as set down by Mr. Maxwell Grant, my raconteur, and do find it a true account of my activities. Signed, The Shadow.
The fog was thick at the center of the bridge, where Harry Vincent stood leaning against the rail. Mist, thick black mist, nothing but mist. It seemed to invite his plunge. Yet he hesitated, as many wait when they are on the brink of death, until, with a mad impulse, he swung his body across the rail and loosened his hands. Something clamped upon his shoulder. An iron grip held him balanced between life and death. Then, as though his body possessed no weight whatsoever, the man felt himself pulled around in a sweeping circle. He staggered and struck the sidewalk of the bridge. He turned to confront the person who had interfered. He faced a tall, black-cloaked figure that might have represented death itself, for he could not have sworn that he was looking at a human being. The stranger's face was entirely obscured by a broad-brimmed felt hat bent downward over his features, and the long black coat looked almost like part of the thickening fog. Fear clutched the heart of the man who had been saved against his will. A voice spoke through the darkness. It was a weird, chilling voice, scarcely more than a whisper, yet clear and penetrating.
This is my promise. Life, with enjoyment, with danger, with excitement, and with money. Life above all, with honor. But if I give it, I demand obedience. Absolute obedience.
At the close of The Living Shadow, we hear conjecture that the Shadow may have been an aviator in the First World War, or a spy, or both. And most disturbing of all, a gangster nicknamed Spire tells his underworld friends,
I seen the shadow. I looked for his face. I saw nothing but a piece of white that looked like a bandage. Maybe the shadow ain't got no face to speak of. Looked like the bandage hid something in the back. There was a young guy once who the crooks was afraid of. He was a famous spy in the war, and they say he was wounded over in France. Wounded in the face. I think the shadow of this guy come back.
The Shadow Pulp had been created to secure a trademark. No one had particularly high hopes for the magazine. Street and Smith published lots of pulps, and many never lasted beyond the first few issues. Only a precious few struck gold and became fixtures in American life. But to Street and Smith's surprise, the first issue of The Shadow, a detective magazine, dated April 1, 1931, was one of them. The entire print run sold out. It was doubled for the second issue. That sold out too. And so did succeeding issues. The Shadow had captured the public imagination. The object of fascination and obsession, he was now on his way to becoming the most popular character in two separate mediums, the radio drama and the pulp magazine, at the height of their glory days. The Shadow is the only fictional character ever created who can make that claim. It happened because Gibson had created an uncompromising avenger of evil just when the public was perfectly in the mood to embrace an uncompromising avenger of evil. The Shadow was created only a few years after Sigmund Freud first theorized that the personality is composed of three parts: the ego, which is the conscious self, the superego, which is the parental voice of conscience, and id, the dark primal emotions. To a large extent, the Shadow is a personification of the id, and his adventures play out like national psychodramas told in the form of cliffhanger serials in prose. In a time when evil seemed to swallow wine and rejoice in high places, the Shadow brought justice to those who seemed insulated from justice. Cold, remote, perceptive. He was part abstract force and part myth. Yet for all his clandestine contrivances and bizarre machinations, he was an unseen force sustaining the public good, and the public appetite for him was insatiable.
Do another 4, they said, and then they said do it monthly. Next thing they wanted them twice a month. Well, this was the Depression, and that was a good thing to be doing. I just dropped everything else and did the Shadow for 15 years. I was sort of depression-proof.
Gibson was paid $400 for The Living Shadow. He would eventually make more than $700 for each novel. During the dark days of the Great Depression, this was considered a very healthy income indeed. If he wanted to, Gibson could buy a brand new car every month and pay for it in cash with wages from his shadow writing. He rented a huge luxury apartment near Manhattan's Central Park and took to living like a prince.
Life is gonna be a wee wow wee for my shadow and me.
Shadow fans, the entire documentary you're watching right now is only about 15,000 words. Gibson wrote 1,440,000 words in less than 10 months. And that record was just the beginning, because he wrote the series for 15 consecutive years. How? How in the world did he do it? Walter Gibson once wrote in his diary, "A strange feeling grips me as I write. I do not feel tired. I seem filled with a strong vigor. The past seems vague and far away, while the future spreads before me full of mystery." As time passed, Gibson was living, thinking, even dreaming his shadow stories in one continuous process. Ideas came to him faster and faster. Sometimes the ideas would fly so fast, he wondered if his fingers could keep up with them. He used to knock out a shadow novel a week, then take a few days off because his fingertips were too sore to begin work on the next book. Instead, he'd spend 2 or 3 days on plots and outlines. He was living the thing all the time, and one story just merged with the next.
I would knock off 30 to 40 pages a day. The pages were 250 words, and there were 200 pages for a story. That meant in 5 days, if I did 40 pages a day, I'd had my writing done.
Gloria was quite oblivious to the weave of more distant shapes. Almost a half block behind her, a gliding shadow was keeping constant pace, as though it were Gloria's own. Singularly, it seemed to seek other shadows as though magnetized by them. Once blended with the darkness, it disappeared, but later it would unexpectedly emerge from the blackness in a most unlikely quarter. Only once did the shadow reveal itself as possessing substance. That was when Gloria turned a corner and could not have looked back to see the sudden change. Gathering itself like ink drawn by a blotter, that shape became a silhouetted figure that took a quick shortcut to the corner. Despite the clammy dampness of the fog, there was the slight sweep of a cloak that trailed from hidden shoulders, a momentary glint from keen, burning eyes beneath the obscuring brim of a black slouch hat. The shadow, master stalker of the night, had, for some reason known only to himself, picked up the trail of Gloria Brent, the girl who was seeking the mysterious Jade Dragon. Coming up next, the Shadow's secret sanctum.